the HCL Tech Trends and Insights podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HCL Tech Trends and Insights podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Heather Domin, Vice President and Head of the Office of Responsible AI and Governance here at HCLTech. Ahead of her Gartner Symposium session on regulation, responsibility, and ROI, mastering the EU AI Act for innovation, we're going to discuss this piece of legislation, how it can accelerate AI adoption, strengthen trust, and drive measurable ROI through smart governance and risk frameworks. Before we get into the questions, Heather, how are you?
Yes, I'm doing well, Nick. It's very great to be here with you.
Absolutely. So let's start with how you see the EU AI Act reshaping global norms around AI governance, especially for jurisdictions outside of the EU.
Yeah, so it's really an exciting time because we've seen the evolution over the years, right? There's been times when we've wondered, what's going to be happening with regulations. And now we're seeing, right, the EU AI Act really helping to shape global norms, and it's impacting beyond just Europe, right? We're obviously seeing this become a global benchmark and something that many other regions are looking to for, helping set their own standards. And it's definitely got that extraterritorial scope. So, there are organizations, especially global organizations like HCLTech and many others, where they need to comply. And there are many different jurisdictions and standards bodies, which are also looking for how can we align with the EU AI Act and make sure that we have some unified approaches that, especially for today's global businesses, they can operate in that environment.
Sure. And adhering to the AI Act is, I imagine, a challenge in itself. But what are the other challenges organizations are facing when it comes to implementing AI governance?
Yeah, it's definitely a situation where we've known for some time that there is a strong coordination needed across many different groups for AI governance, and this leads to some challenges. So, given that these are systems which touch virtually every area of the business, and we need expertise from many different areas. And it's not necessarily just owned by one group, right? The actual AI governance process and the key pieces. For example, we're going to need legal teams, privacy teams, data governance teams, obviously your technology teams, and many other teams involved. And so because of that coordination often becomes a challenge when putting things into practice, because you need a lot of really good communication. You need to have very good metrics and ways of understanding the value that you're driving and transforming processes at, multi-organizational, multi-line of business scale. And then sometimes, obviously, we have challenges around when it gets to the model level, technical level. There can be differences in how you apply AI governance principles across different platforms and using different tools. So getting teams to adapt across all of that, getting them to understand how to do that often becomes a challenge, especially in large organizations like HCLTech. But I hear it from just about everybody that I speak to.
Absolutely. So change management and operating model transformation are absolutely key. Looking at the EU AI Act, it introduces a risk-based clarification of AI systems. How effective do you think this approach is in addressing real-world harms or challenges, and what gaps remain?
Right. So a risk-based classification is really important. I actually advocate for this myself. I think it's absolutely the right approach. It definitely puts the focus on the use case, so how you're actually using AI versus the technology itself. And that is important, and a pragmatic approach when we think about, how we manage and govern AI systems. So certainly this puts the focus on and prioritizes having the right amount of oversight and governance controls where harm is most likely. So, for example, higher risk scenarios involving surveillance or scoring mechanisms, things like that, where it is certainly the potential for higher risk. And in certain contexts, such as, finance and healthcare, certainly that is and tends to be higher risk. And it's important that we have the controls because of the potential harms that can occur. And so in terms of gaps, I mean, sometimes, right, because of all of this is so new and we're still evolving international standards, right? Many of them just having been published or soon to be published. And the UAI Act itself is new. I think organizations, even with that risk-based classification and an understanding of what they need to cover, are still, and we've seen this in many studies, even a study that we published earlier this year with MIT, where only 15% of organizations, felt really ready to implement controls. This is what I'm seeing and hearing can be the gap, is that, we know where we need to be, but the standards and the actual implementation sometimes is still in process of getting set up.
Talking about the higher risk of different AI systems, can you advise organizations on the practical steps that they should take if their AI systems do fall into that higher risk category?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're going to need an understanding, obviously, of the UAI Act, working with your team, having some analysis of, what systems you have that qualify as high risk and what your obligations are. So your legal team and your governance team will have to take a look at that. So it is certainly important that you're going to do a formal inventory and understanding where you have these systems. That's usually step one. So just understanding, are you obligated to follow, the UAI Act? Do you have compliance obligations, and for which systems? So certainly understanding that, and then, conducting your formal risk classification and assessments. So you're going to need to then, once you have an inventory, really assess for each of your systems and determine if you have gaps, if you have new things that you need to implement. Maybe you need to implement quality management systems and maintain some technical documentation. Maybe there's some data governance or human oversight protocols that you need to put into place. All of that will become important. And then, of course, where you do have specific obligations to register the system or undergo conformity assessments, maybe, preparing for incident reporting and post-market monitoring, all of that can be things that you are, getting ready for once you know and identify which systems you need to be doing that for.
And what governance frameworks or processes do you recommend for embedding EU AI Act compliance into day-to-day operations?
Yeah, one really practical one a lot of organizations do is, establish some sort of cross-functional AI governance committee. It can be an AI ethics board, a committee, some sort of group that essentially can help bring in that cross-functional perspective, as we talked about in the beginning, about the importance of having all the players sitting there, right? So having and you'll need somebody to lead that. I lead that for HCLTech, and, there's many different ways that you could roll something like that out, but having that committee, and also I think aligning on clear roles and responsibilities so people understand, obviously what they need to do. We found in many cases, in speaking with many clients and organizations around the world, that having those clearly defined roles and responsibilities often is critical and a key piece of getting that governance framework and process to actually function. People have to know what they have to do, what they're responsible to do. You can align it to things like the ISO 42001 standard, which is the international standard for AI management systems. And you can make sure, obviously, in your technical process that you're embedding compliance checkpoints and, your guardrails directly into the AI lifecycle as you build, all the way from the beginning of, thinking about which AI systems you're going to develop through to, development, deployment, and, when you actually go on to monitor that on an ongoing basis.
And I think this is the key question. How can organizations balance innovation with these stricter governance and oversight requirements?
Yeah, this is still a question that I'm hearing a lot. I think it's top of mind for many. And I think the root of the question really comes from people being concerned that they're going to be slowed down by the governance controls and the guardrails. And they're concerned that if they're slowed down, they won't be able to innovate as quickly as their peers and maybe losing competitive advantage, right? And what we've seen over and over again is that actually it's the opposite. That in fact, if you do AI governance right, that you can actually drive faster innovation and more successful implementations of AI over the long term. So that means that any innovation that you do is more likely to actually deliver the ROI that you hope. And so I think if you really think of it differently, you think about treating compliance as a way of making innovation happen with the right guardrails from the start, right? Because the other thing that can happen, we've seen many times where a company may deploy something and something goes wrong. You have to, it can really actually derail the entire system. Maybe you can't use it anymore. Or you spend a lot of time trying to backtrack, right? So if you have the right systems set up to enable the teams, and it does need to be that risk-based approach. So obviously that's another way that you can balance, is that you don't want to apply heavy controls for lower risk systems. So, clearly it needs to be the appropriate level of governance for the risk level of the AI system. And I think, making sure that it becomes embedded in the process that the teams do every day, just like we've all learned to adopt and deal with, privacy and security and cyber issues and all of that. And then, I don't think any of us would necessarily think about deploying something without those checks, like your security controls. I mean, it's basically unheard of. And we all know the risks that come with not doing that and the value that we get by doing it. And I think more and more over time, we'll probably hear less of this question because AI governance will become so embedded and just a given in what we do, and people will understand how it directly contributes to the value. But I do think that risk-based, pragmatic approach is also a key piece of the picture right now.
Looking ahead, Heather, how can businesses future-proof their AI strategies for upcoming regulations beyond the EU AI Act?
Yeah, so I think we have to remain adaptable. I think a key piece of this actually is about, AI literacy and helping your organization actually stay in a growth mindset and continuous learning cycle for AI. And so you need to, because the technology itself continually evolves, right? So you need to learn about agentic AI now and many other things that are coming to really make sure that everybody can speak the same language across the business. That's another key piece of this, right? So you can't effectively govern or responsibly adopt AI if the teams can't even really speak to each other, right? So you need to have, and because of the cross-functional nature of governance and really making AI success in a business, you do need to make sure that you have that appropriate level of understanding about AI and continually upskill employees and various stakeholders. I think that is certainly a key piece of it. I think you can think about, how to make your governance frameworks agile and have the ability to adapt and evolve as new standards keep coming. So obviously we have ISO 42001, but there's new ones coming out. There's also, depending on where you are in the world, Obviously, the EU AI Act is a very key piece of it. And in the US, maybe a NIST AI risk management framework is another one that organizations are concerned about. So you need to be able to keep an eye on standards around the world and adjust and be adaptable. So, I think that is a key piece. You want to have strategic partnerships and really stay abreast of regulatory changes as well. So I think participating in wide stakeholder discussions that involve policymakers and academics and many different stakeholders from around the world is an important part of really future-proofing your strategy, because you're going to be learning and hearing and staying adaptable to what's coming.
Well, thank you so much for your time and insights on this really interesting topic.
Thank you, Nick.